Hey everyone! I recently sat down for a discussion with Doug Glanville. Doug is a former Major League Baseball player who spent 9 years with the Cubs and Phillies and is now a marquee sports and ESPN commentator. Doug brings a unique perspective to the game during his time on and off the field. Over 45 minutes, we discussed his journey from player to analyst and his thoughts on the evolution of baseball in general. It was a dream opportunity to connect with someone who's lived and breathed the sport at the highest level. I'm so grateful for Doug for sharing his time and expertise with me. Let's dive in.
My first question for you is like growing up in New Jersey, what got you started on your path to becoming a professional baseball player? What steps did you take and how did you ultimately accomplish that goal? And how did you get there?
Yeah, well, Max, it was literally steps. I mean, so I have an older brother who's almost 8 years older than I am, and he loved baseball and from jump. And my dad, being from Trinidad, played cricket, so it wasn't exactly a connection, but my parents instilled a lot of love for baseball in my brother, and he drew up a map. He literally had a sort of a plan for me as to how I was going to make it to Major League Baseball, and it included things like wiffle ball, stick ball, street ball, stratomatic baseball. He had the athletic side, the intellectual side, the strategy side, and so I just love my brother, and I've always wanted to chase him as a younger baby brother, and he inspired that passion for competitiveness. And following suit, it was all the steps, right? Little league, played in summer ball. I played for the high school, just kept going. And every time I looked up, I was like, oh, I'm doing pretty well here, and I'm still playing. So let's just keep going. And before I knew it, I started having professional opportunities after getting recruited for college, and never really looked back.
Yeah. Can you name like off the top of your head some of like the most challenging moments of your career that you can remember? Like some of the
And
times where it was like it wasn't easy, but you made it through and
well,
you know,
professionally or just across the board, I guess.
professionally, just like looking across, like looking back on your career and post career too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a journey, man. In baseball, because you have a minor league system, it's a long road. And I was a first round draft pick, but I still took four and a half years in the minors, plus 2 years of winter ball, or three really, if you count the Arizona Fall League. So I played a long time, a lot of games to get the reps, and a lot of different moments. I was like, well, I don't know where this is going. Even from the beginning of learning how to be a professional, after you get drafted, you're kind of thrown in a situation I had never been in before. I was playing every single day. That was different. Obviously, a wood bat, I played a little bit, but it was challenging to adjust there. And then there was some relationships you have to kind of figure out how to navigate. Tough coaches, guys you're playing with from all over the world, building those relationships. I had really nightmare dynamic with my AAA manager, so that was really
Mhm.
rough because for about a year and a half it was just World War III, and did not. It was oil and water. Any other analogy you can come up with, two people that just did not see eye to eye, and
Gotcha.
but it led to winter ball in Puerto Rico, where I did have some managers and coaches that were fully supportive. So sometimes even your detractors, I learned you had to kind of thank, because they kind of really, whether intentionally or not, kind of made you realize where you stood. So I think a lot of it was minor league journey, and I've been through injuries. Right, first really month of my professional career, I hurt my shoulder. I had kind of a stinger nerve issue
Mhm.
that set me back for a while, and then I had to come back, miss some of the season the next year, which was my first full minor league season. And I learning how to travel, being on the road,
Mhm.
buses, planes, connections, sleeping on bus racks. you know,
Yeah.
yeah, it was wild, and baseball was the centerpiece. You love it, you play it, and that was the driver to be able to go through it. But I think there was a lot of stops, and then I got traded a couple of times at the major league level,
Mhm.
and those were adjustments because growing up, all my players stayed on the same teams, and then all of
Yeah.
a sudden, I was like, what is this? Like, I'm like
Yeah.
an asset. It's like, so that was a reality check as well. I got traded actually the day within 24 hours of my grandfather passing away, so that
Oh,
was
no.
that was tough when I got traded from the Cubs to the Phillies.
Did you find the eventual adjustment going from Chicago to Philly? Like if it was rough effort, like did you eventually find your step in Philly, and did you end up really enjoying your time there and everyone you played with?
Yeah, I had a great time. I
Yeah.
mean, even along the way, I did appreciate that I was doing something I love for a living. And in the beginning, I only made $327 every 2 weeks. That was my minor league salary. But along the way, yeah, there's no doubt that being traded was one of those moments of like, well, I could be treasure or trash, depends how I look at it. And the Phillies saw me as a starter, so and which is something I embraced wholly. And I think that gave me the motivation to say, okay, this is an opportunity to really prove that I can be an everyday player. I'd come off a very good winter ball in Puerto Rico. So that gave me a confidence that I could do this. And you need those milestones to play against the best and do well. And you're like, okay, maybe I belong here. Okay. And so there's no doubt that Philly was that push not only to just be like a big leaguer, but to be a starter. That was the real big moment there. And I
So
was given the bandwidth to kind of work it through too.
so Philly was like a big jumping off point for your career. Like that was a big milestone, right? Because you switched from
Yeah.
depth to starter, and that's crazy. That's huge.
Yeah. And like I got a chance to start a decent amount in 1997 with the Cubs before they traded me. And it was right around expansion and all that stuff was going on. So I was not sure that the Cubs really saw me as an everyday center fielder. My manager, Jim Riggleman, was great. He always used to whisper to me, like, you could play every day. I don't know, I got to do what I got to do. But, I believe that you can be a starter in center field one day. But I was in left field at the time. They had Brian McRae, they had Lance Johnson, so I didn't have anywhere to go. And but I got a chance to play as other left fielders that they were revolving in to get the job had their struggles, and then I'd play for a week, have a good week, then I'd sit again. The next guy would come in, and they admitted at the end of the season that I wasn't supposed to be the guy that survived this.
Yeah.
They thought because I wasn't a left fielder, I was a center fielder, and I was competing against big, more home run hitter guys.
So you're going
And
out of your
every time,
position. Yeah.
yeah, I was out of position. So they always had a pretext to say, well, that's great that you hit 300, but you're hitting like, you hit like 4 home runs. So they weren't really seeing me as like,
Yeah.
this is the end all be all, which is why
Yeah.
Philly was so big because they were able to put me in my rightful position at center.
And especially at a time where steroid use was surging in the league, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, steroids was off the charts. And so, even the role of a center fielder changed because the expectation to hit home runs was different because of steroids.
I recently watched a clip a few weeks ago where you homered off Randy Johnson in a lead off against Houston. I forget exactly what the year was, but does that give players like you especially like more confidence? Like I'm not gonna say like you because you've already made it to the big leagues, but like oh my god, homering off someone that's as monumental in baseball history like Randy Johnson. Like does that mean a little bit more to players?
Yeah, it definitely means more. And a lot of that happens way before that moment. And I think it might have been with the Diamondbacks time, but
Yeah.
but I think you know, you have these markers of success, and sometimes it's just a matter of the confidence to know that you should be here, you can be here, you could be productive here. And a lot of those are going against the best. You're going against the great ones, being the underdog. And funny enough, I faced Randy Johnson way before that in spring training when he was coming back from his back injury, and he got his
Okay.
velocity back up. And it was a meaningless spring training game, and they told me I was starting tomorrow. And then I looked, and Randy Johnson was pitching, so I was like, okay. But I hit a triple off him to right center, and I was like, okay, that was big,
That was a big moment. Yeah.
big moment. I remember Teddy Higuera, who was a great pitcher with the Brewers, facing him in spring training. So a lot of it was, saying, okay, I can hit these guys. I can, and that was really the most important aspect. Playing defense is one thing, stealing bases, running, that's important. But really, if your bat's going to kind of take you, and just hitting against some of the great pitchers and having success definitely makes a big difference.
How did your time at UPenn shape you? How you approached your career?
Yeah, Penn. Well, look, Penn was a phenomenal institution,
Yeah.
Great education. I had an engineering degree. I think that strategy, the discipline, the approach, even the numbers games, I think that was an important part of what I took with me. I was a systems engineer, so I kind of understood how to see things how to integrate things and optimize patterns. And that was sort of where my mind was sitting in the years of studying as a systems engineer. And so there's no doubt that at the balance as well, figure out how to balance, really rigorous academics and trying to play baseball at the same time and do all these other things. That was tough. And I had to make some tough choices. Like, for example, I was invited to the Olympic trials that I turned down because it was the middle of a semester engineering school. So I was like, how am I going to take a month off here? I took criticism for missing a game to study for a final the year I got drafted. So there was a lot of things that, I had to kind of make tough calls and, know that I had it in me to commit to professional baseball when the time came, but I also had to finish what I started. My parents put a lot of money into my education, first generation college students themselves. So it was really important for me to finish. And look, even when I was supposed to walk for graduation, which was in '93, it was the middle of the season, and I was like, I gotta walk, I gotta go. And they were like, where are you going? Why? I was like, gotta go. So it was. So I think those decisions at first was a big criticism of me, as all the reporting said that I was a first round draft pick, and however, they were worried about my commitment to the game, commitment to the sport,
Yeah.
because I had all these other priorities. And I eventually flipped that on its head because I said, well, look, I'm at Penn where there's nobody in the stands. I'm not on scholarship. I'm playing. It's freezing out here. When it rains, we have to pull the tarp on the field. Like there's no glory here. Like,
Exactly.
we played because we love it. That's it.
Done.
And eventually I think that, sort of sank in. I was like, okay, wait a minute. This is someone that actually, loves the game, and there's no trappings to where he's playing right now. And
sure.
and he has to still also maintain this other world at a certain way. So I think it prepared me really well. I mean, I think the big thing was the criticism, learning how to deal with that, because I was seen as like, too smart for his own good and criticized for, what all those things that come with like being the Ivy Leaguer or whatever.
Where's your dedication, really? Like,
and sometimes it wasn't sometimes it wasn't in good fun. Sometimes it was, but I think there was question marks, and every player has question marks. So that was mine, and I think it really did prepare me. And I think when I got to the big leagues, ironically, it became such an asset because there was a lot of teams that like, hey, this guy was a serious student, and they saw it as a good example. A good example for the fans and the kids. It's sort of to turn around in another way. And I thought, that was nice to see it come full circle like that.
yeah, definitely. Like, having to attend your classes and, put in the work too at the same time. Like it's a big commitment. Like you're doing two big commitments at once.
Yeah, it was
And
big. And look, there's no question that there's a lot of phenomenal colleges out there that that people like players put in tons of work. But there was this unique circumstance around Ivy League. For one, we had less baseball, right? Less of a schedule. There was much a greater perception of you're not prioritizing baseball that I had to overcome. I just played less. So there was all those other elements that also came with the sort of labels that come with like being an Ivy League player, and
like, oh, he's too good for everyone.
Yeah, he's too smart. He's not tough enough. All those things. Unfortunately, I had many players before me, even at Penn, that kind of forged the path to know that these guys can play too, and it was fun carrying that banner.
Yeah. What have you most enjoyed about your career, your post baseball career, working at Marquee, ESPN? What are like the best parts of your job? Like, what do you enjoy most about that side of baseball now that you're on the other side of it? Right.
Yeah, well, I love it. I love writing. That's my favorite
Mhm.
method of communication, and I wish I could do more, but I kind of do it on my own now. And I want to launch a Substack because it's like I want to just keep writing all the time. And so I think there's an element of that. But I think I've learned to love the challenge of kind of finding all these different ways to communicate the sport, whether you're analyzing it, whether you're loving on it, whether it's poetic. And I still love the camaraderie of the game. I go do these games and I still see old friends and family, and people I haven't seen in the game. I love that part. That has never changed. I think the diversity of the game is a beautiful thing that baseball brings. I think that the other thing that's different too is I have a family. I didn't play. I wasn't married when I played. I got married after I played. Now with 4 kids, I think it's presented a different perspective on what it means. Sharing the love of the game. Traveling is harder in many ways because even though I don't travel as much as I did as a player, it's still very tough to, okay, I'm gone this weekend. I'm doing a game in LA, coming back on Monday, kind of thing. So there's those elements, and even though I know why I'm doing this, just like you, Max, like trying to put my kids through school, so making sure that they're doing what they need to do and get what they need and support. And then my wife holding it down. So those are challenges of just where you're just a
Yeah.
nomad in some ways.
Yeah.
And so I think I look at baseball and think about what I miss, but what I don't miss. I don't miss being on a plane every 5 seconds, and all this, and I don't miss the injury rehabs and as I got older, getting traded a couple of times and being in fourth place, and those things were tough. And as I got older, I wasn't playing as much, and yet it took longer for me to get ready to play because I was older. So I think it ran its course. I was kind of ready to retire when I did,
Yeah.
but I
Like you
probably
finally
could.
felt the wear and tear catch up.
Yeah, I probably could have played a little longer. I mean, I had opportunities to play longer, but I just think it was kind of time, and just like you said, it's like the wear and tear and the time it takes to kind of just get ready for a game. I had surgery in 2003. All those things start to kind of weigh on you, and I think it's obviously a great commitment too. It's every day. It's 162 games. It's travel. And it's a great gig. I don't, but I love what I do now. I love being in the media. I love, talking about the game, breaking down the game, learning its history, talking to players, contextualizing. I really enjoy it. I mean, it's a great spot for me.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you some questions about the league in general, specific teams, just the outlook of the sport in general. What are some little things you noticed about like that the average fan wouldn't notice or like the average fan doesn't see about last year's Mets? Because this going from 11 under 500 all the way to an NL game 6 of the NLCS against the best team in baseball and then signing Juan Soto a month and a half later. Can you like what goes into a culture change like a sudden culture change like that?
Well, I'll tell you, I traveled pretty much practically with the Mets from the end of September to the end of their season.
Okay.
And to the point where Carlos Mendoza said, "Hey, you want a locker? Because you're in here all the time." So I got to know them really well, and I think Mendoza set the tone. He really set the tone and believed even when they were down. And everybody's like, "They're done." Typical Mets. He was like, "No, they were focused," and they had a lot of different players. Whether Iglesias, guys that just came in and were part of that culture shift. JD Martinez, there's a lot of guys that just got healthy. Roberto Alvarez, they just sort of helped infuse the new culture. They played well, with injuries. Edwin Diaz went down, struggling. They found ways to kind of keep it moving. And when all was said and done, they had a bunch of guys that got along well, that had a lot of fun, and were able to do a lot of different roles. They had like 6 closers by the end. Even though Diaz was back,
Yeah.
they guys were comfortable in high leverage situations. They had role players that were stepping it up and doing their part. They had Lindor become Lindor and
Yeah.
lead, and just a great character in the game. So I think they put it all together at a right time. And I think the part you didn't always see is like it was fun to cover those guys. They were open. They were very open. You could sit. I would talk to Marte, all like, hey, about like inside out swings, and they would just sort of talk to you. Lindor was very transparent about what he was thinking, his plans. And Nemo was a great guy, just constantly just giving you all his time. Yeah, I thought it was really refreshing to be around the Mets, and I think that the energy you saw on that team, was kind of reflected in how they were in the locker room. And I think there was a chip to say, hey, people kind of jumped off the bandwagon early in the season, and we were just getting going. And so I think because they had such a great year, they get Juan Soto out of it to a large degree
Exactly.
because he's just like, oh, this team can win, and they
Yeah.
were this close, and I could be that guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're an exciting team.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the Yankees offer 710, I think it was, and the Mets 715. That's barely a difference. Like that will not change one thing in your life, no matter how where you sign. You have to pick this. You pick the spot that's best suits you and where you think the best organization where they're going. And I think Soto breaking off and signing someone like the Mets, that was huge. The Mets have never historically never done that, like taking a star from the Yankees like that, especially one who's like 26 on a Hall of Fame track. That has never happened in my 14 years of being a fan.
Yeah.
And that was like I think I'm going to look back on this like a really impactful moment because before this you're always told like as a young Met fan,
Yeah.
don't expect the big signings or like always prep for disappointment because that's what happens. But I think this year really shifted a lot of the fans' optimism and their expectations. Right.
Yeah, look, David Stearns,
Going
who's running the
right,
show, he's a Met fan. He grew up a Mets fan. He kind of knows the culture, and I think they embrace the underdog. And even when they're getting the money now to do what they need to do, in fact, probably a lot of Met fans are a little uncomfortable with that. They don't want to buy a championship. I think they like the organic growth, but it's like, hey, you got the pieces, and you could still have your Met culture wrapped around it and still win. That's going to be fun to see and watch.
the Dodgers basically they didn't basically buy a championship, but they added a lot of very expensive core pieces that ended up leading to a championship. But at the end of the day, they had that like Dodger culture of like grit and like they just look like as a fan watching them in the NLCS, they looked relentless. The way they like
Oh yeah.
they were like holding off on every almost strike, how lights out almost every reliever that came out was. And I think as something Cohen said in 2020 was he was trying to build the Dodgers of the East. And the organization take a big step forward.
Well, Brooklyn, they were in Brooklyn, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not a stretch. Look, Dodgers have the resources. I think it became more evident when they had all these injuries that would have destroyed any team. They had the money to rebuild enough and make trades like Flaherty, and like
and
teams can't do that. A lot of teams can't do that. They lose the big money guy, and they're just like, okay, well, but they've like set the bar, and they're Dave Roberts, really wonderful to talk to, very engaging. Shohei Ohtani, they have a lot of respectful extreme superstars on their team. So they have a nice culture going on and a belief now, and so they're a team to beat, no doubt about it.
yeah, and yeah. What are some factors you could see as to why the Blue Jays have struggled to sign players, right? Because this has been what 3 years in a row of not landing the guy that they had their eyes on, right? They almost got Otani, that didn't work. They were in on Soto, that didn't work. They almost got Burns. Do you think there's a potential like either culture problem or like organizational problem that the players who hit free agency see, and say like I don't think this is the best possible destination for me in my career? Yeah,
The Blue Jays it is enigmatic because there's been a couple of years I've been like, they're going to win the East. I felt really bullish on these guys because they have, a lot of talent. And for a while, it was like young talent, like generational players that I played against their dads kind of talent.
yeah,
And so their pieces look like they were there. They just had not synchronized it in a way to get those wins. And they made the pitching splash. They had a couple injuries like everybody else. And I think that whether some players may say, all right, going to Canada, is that something you would think that wouldn't matter so much, especially if you're Juan Soto from the DR and you're like, hey, whatever, I'm playing wherever I can play. But
exactly.
you do have those question marks, but there's talent there to win, like now,
Exactly.
and so it does seem like that one piece. And they were able to get Gosman, they were able to get some frontline pitchers.
Yeah.
They just have not gotten that sort of final bat that they're looking for.
Yeah.
So, but I think if they're a team that if they have a big year without that and they get into the race, maybe at the trade deadline, and they're willing to open up the wallet more, they might be able to land somebody that could be game changing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like there is a great core there. You have Vlad, you have
Yeah.
Bichette, you have Gossman, Barrios, Bassett. Like there's a
Yeah.
foundation
Our
there for a
show. Yeah.
championship,
Oh,
our
yeah.
show. Yeah. So it's just confusing to me. Like you would think the Blue Jays would be looked at very would be looked at as a targeted free agency. Like I get to play with Vlad, I get to play with Bichette, I get to play with Springer, someone who's won a championship. Guys,
Yeah,
um,
you'd think, but they're not
exactly.
there yet. Not there yet. And then they have a tough division. Let's face it, like Baltimore, Boston, Yankees. I mean, Tampa's always a pain in the neck. I mean, you can't be like just off your game in the AL East. You're just going to
Exactly.
be on the outside looking in.
Baltimore's only going to get better. Yankees will always be the Yankees. The Rays, like even at their worst, they're always around the 500 mark. Like
Yeah.
you can't really, yeah. And Boston's Boston, so you can't really slip up in the way that you can
Nope.
in like the Central or something like
Right.
that.
Exactly.
What do you see the Phillies making any impact moves? Do you think the front office is going to be motivated by their postseason exits the last couple of years? Because it's only gone downhill from here. Right? You got eliminated in Game 6 in 2022, got eliminated in Game 7 2023 in the CS, and then you got pretty much blown out by the Mets in the DS. Do you see the front office and Dombrowski in general just taking a big step, like opening up the checkbook, making a big move that no one sees coming?
He's always open up the checkbook. I mean, Dave Dombrowski is a real one of geniuses in this game. He is, and he's relentless about spending, but he's also relentless about having star power. I mean, he really, and he's willing to go for it. He'll trade prospects. He's just like, whatever I got to do. So there's no question he's an all-in type GM or baseball ops, and so if the opportunity presents itself, he's going to go for it. I mean, they have a very talented team. They have a very
Yeah,
talented team. So it's not like they're like, oh my goodness, they're far away. They've been right there. Trey Turner, Schwarber. I mean, these guys, Bryce Harper. They get hot. That's just really one of the more dangerous teams, especially
sure.
offensively.
Yeah,
The
there's totally a
pitching,
rig in there. Yeah,
yeah, the pitching. Look, and like,
yeah,
what can you say when you make the big trades at the trade deadline to shore up an already good bullpen and make it better on paper at least? And they just fell apart in the postseason. Like, there's
you can't
just
really blame any. You can't
what are you
blame
going to do?
yourself.
Like, you can't. He made the moves, like it just did not play out as expected. So there's just sometimes baseball happens, right? You just have bad
Exactly.
matchups. Team gets hot. You just don't get it done. So I don't think there's a lot they need to do. They've done a few things already. Now it's just a matter of like getting back to spring training and doing it again.
So you think a lot of it's going to be like running it? Like you'll add a few pieces, like outside on the edge pieces, but a lot of it's going to be like let's run it back, and hopefully things will go better this year. At the dead, we'll make the moves that end up working out in the postseason eventually.
Yeah, or just you got to
Yeah.
watch that trade deadline. You got to watch that deadline because then you get a barometer like who's playing well, who's right, who can we just back off. They'll have a sense. He usually likes to get 6 starters if he can, just to have the depth. So they're poised pretty well, but Mets have Juan Soto. It's just a tougher
Yeah.
division in that
Yeah.
respect. I think Washington is better.
Yeah.
This is not like Atlanta's always a nightmare. So you can't be status quo in either of these Easts. You just
Yeah.
can't.
Like
So
even as a Mets fan, like I am very excited about Soto, but like the Braves are still out there, Phillies are still out there, Washington's only going to get better. The Nationals have a core coming up. Like it's going to be a cutthroat division.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The only team I can see losing 100 games really is Miami. And that's because of the division they're in. Like they're not even the worst. Miami's not even the worst team. It's just the division they're in is a nightmare.
It is a nightmare.
Yeah. Do you see at the rate baseball's going with the amount of the amount of $700 million or $500 million plus contracts that are handing out? Do you see an eventual salary floor and ceiling being put in place to stop the contracts from getting bigger and bigger, or from the small to middle market teams from just never having a chance every year?
Well, look, the hill that the union will die on is the salary cap. It is just like, so if it does happen, it's going to be through a very painful, frustrating process. They've
So
tried
the
to find.
lockout type situation.
I mean, I mean that is like the core belief system around the Players Association. So it would take something monumental, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but it will take a huge shift even in the culture. I mean, yes, you have thresholds, you have taxes. It hasn't stopped Steve Cohen and the Mets to go out and say, whatever, I'm going to pay the tax. That's supposed to be the deterrent. And I said, once you build a floor, you have a ceiling. Once you have a ceiling, it's like it just starts to create, more and more limitations and restrictions. And I think if you point to, you ask the questions about what does it do for the players in any of these other leagues that have these sort of structures, and then that's something that the union would look at really closely. And whether it's competitive, and you haven't had a dynasty in baseball or really a repeat. You have certainly teams with money that are consistently in the mix, but it's not like some team has been won 10 years in a row. It's like it's still really hard, even with
To
all this
repeat.
freedom, to repeat. So
Yeah.
so that does say something. Obviously, everyone wants to go to spring training as a player and feel like you can compete.
Exactly.
I don't know if a cap is the way that happens, though. But I think you have to, and then I think culturally, it's going to be really hard for the union to accept it. So, but there's other creative solutions that may work. But that's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, because I was watching when the Mets were on, I was like watching the other games in the background, the Yankees, Royals, and when they played the Guardians, and I realized like these teams, the Royals and the Guardians, they're good, but they never seem to be good enough to make it over that final hump, like the World Series, getting the World Series or winning a chip. Um, the Guardians, that this postseason they were very reliant on an opener for 1 or 2 innings and then having the bullpen. And that strategy, it worked all season until it didn't in the ALCS. So do you see what do you think is the mentality of these teams and their mindsets going into the offseason? Like, we're not going to get a Soto, we're not going to get an Ohtani. How can we
Right.
build around the edges and beat these teams with our analytical advantages?
Right. That's how they have to do it. I mean, and it's not like you're talking about teams that aren't spending 100 million in payroll. Okay. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, yeah, some are, but there's definitely the numbers say that there's certainly more money out floating around, but yes, you don't get Soto for, $700+ million if you're the Kansas City Royals. And whether that leads to sort of a competitive imbalance, it's certainly, not getting star power matters, but also getting on the field. I mean, Soto's played a long time in his short career, and he's won a World Series for sure, but he's also fallen short as a team. It doesn't guarantee. You might be in the mix.
Yeah.
You might not. And so, but yes, the consistency is the challenge for teams like the Royals. The ability to reload and just keep going is a challenge.
Yeah, because you can't just buy your way out of.
You can't just keep buying, keep Bobby Witt, keep doing, keep going. And then that is very hard. You got to get rid of Singer. You got to get rid of this guy. You got to make moves. So that is what is challenging. But I think today is the time where they do seem to find value because of the data and information better than they ever have. And so at least that some of these teams are going to be in the mix. They may not win it, but they're going to be in the mix. And next year it could be the Reds, whatever it is. It's just that's the Yankees are going to be there. Dodgers are going to be there. They're going to be there. Yeah. Will they win? Can't say.
Like the Braves, even though they got eliminated in the wild card, I could easily see them winning 100 next year. Everyone comes back healthy, and
sure.
Acuna's going to take a little time to catch up to speed after tearing his ACL, and Strider's, I imagine, is going to have a slower recovery too because of his injury. But I can easily see them winning a World Series next year. As much as that pains me to say as a New Yorker, like I could see that happen. Do you have any breakout candidates for this year, like pitchers or hitters? Anyone you're looking at that like people may not be talking about, but you're gonna learn their name by the end of the year?
Yeah, I'm just watching. Like spring training is, even though it's like not meaningful in the sense of you're going to hit 500 this year, that's who I like to kind of see who to watch for. Whether it was like Wyatt Langford last year, like, okay, who's this dude? And he had a pretty good year. So I think that I'm just watching to see, especially people who are like Soto in new look environment. It's not saying he would break out. He's doing what he does. But I am very curious about when players emerge in new marketplaces, or they just kind of get their feet wet in spring training. Like a guy like Jackson, Jackson Holiday, and will he be able to put it together? Young guy, and you
Yeah.
get ordained kind of early. It's hard, it's
Yeah.
really tough.
Especially for a guy like Holiday. The talent's there to be
Yeah.
a top 3 player. The question is, is he gonna find his step?
Yeah, just finding a step, and even if it takes him 3 years to find it, he's still a young player. That's what's so hard about things when you're that young. It's like you don't always get the learning curve you deserve or need, and you're just trying to like get your feet wet. So so that's always interesting. I mean, his brother, another great talent. So they have a lot going on with some of the younger players, but there was a great crop of young rookie of the year candidates this year. A lot of fun with that. And, and especially in National League, it was like who you're going to pick. And so this is a good time. Young players who are productive. So I'm going to go in and see kind of what spring training brings and see who kind of flies over the radar.
Yeah, I have my eye on Jace Young. That's one of my Jace Young, the guy from the Tigers. You didn't see a lot of him last year, but he could end up being a big piece. I think the Tigers, I could see the Tigers reaching the ALCS or the World Series next year with the pitching and the hitting.
Yeah,
if it all comes together, I could.
It was
easily
so crazy. I picked them last year, and it
really
looked like a dud. And then I did the Little League World Series game, Major League game, and it's when they beat the Yankees in extra innings. And it was just after they got rid of all the veterans, like bye, and brought up all these young guys, traded for a couple guys, and they were just. And AJ Hinch was like, "I'm just seeing what these guys can do." Well, they could do a lot.
Yeah, you have Scooble, you have Riley Green, you have Colt Keith. Like you have guys now.
Yeah, and the key to being a Tiger is having 2 last names. If you have 2 last names, Parker Meadows, that's what makes you a Tiger.
Yeah. Yeah. How would you say you feel about Sammy Sosa apologizing to the Cubs in a few weeks ago and that whole reunion process? Like looking back on as your time as a player, and especially with that organization in general. Like, do you have any firm thoughts about this?
Yeah, but I wrote about it a few times. I got an exclusive interview from Sammy years ago about it, and so I definitely have paid attention, and obviously playing with him. And I always thought it was a shame, however way it got there is one thing, but it was a shame that relationship was so broken because you have to acknowledge how exciting a player and how fun he was and how he was so good with the fans in Chicago, and just ended like a disaster. And I just didn't understand why it was so irretrievably broken. And so for that reason, like, look, I'm not, loving the whole, I played in this PED era, and I know he made some acknowledgments that alluded to his choices. These are important steps, in general. And look, I have no love for, what happened with this game, with PEDs and watching what it had, the impact it had on players, the marketplace, the fairness, all the things that you could list. But at the same time, making some acknowledgments or reference to choices, at least that helps to say, okay, this was something that was part of the equation. And, and I think when you look at Sosa, who is really a lifelong Cub, basically, the one marketplace where you should have some bandwidth of forgiveness is your home. Barry Bonds has a nice fan base in San Francisco. He's not completely alone. It's like, I think that's still important for a game that allows for a lot of forgiveness. It doesn't mean players will, or the records will, or you should have a free hall pass to just be like, hey, throw you in the Hall of Fame, whatever. But I do think there's room for that, especially with certain acknowledgments. So, so I'm very curious how it will move forward. I know he's going to go to the Cubs convention, and it'll be a love fest, and I that's going to be good. It's going to be good for the Cubs and that organization.
Yeah, especially because again, like you said, like Bonds and Sosa, the choices they made may not been the most ethical, but they mean so much to the fans. Even all these years later, knowing what happened, the fans love them, and I don't think completely you can acknowledge the issue, but I don't think icing them out of the organization completely is the right way to go, especially since it's been 20 or so years since that initially happened. I have one final question because I don't want to keep you too long, but how do you see baseball evolving in media and broadcasting in general?
Well, it's changing a lot. I mean, there's so much change. Right now, baseball's got a lot of uncertainty with the regional sports networks. What's
Yeah.
going to happen? The marketplace is very uncertain. Even though attendance was great, the ratings were good for the playoffs. There was a lot of exciting things and positives to build on. There's a lot of uncertainty about the local markets, and it's kind of put a cloud over things. So that's going to be interesting. Whether it's conglomerate forums, MLB, ESPN, whatever it is, hard to say. But there's going to be a new look, I would imagine, after the next couple of years, especially with opt outs and rates and all these things that can change, expiration dates of licensing deals and rights holders. All that could come together at the same time and make it very interesting on who the players will be. So I'm watching that really closely. How we cover the game is so different. We don't have our, like at ESPN, we don't have we used to have all these baseball tonights. Now there's just one a week. We used to have so much studio content, and it's thinner. That's partly streaming services, and people have Instagram and all it's very digestible, and it happens so quickly now, the content. So I think you'll see a lot of, you don't see as many shows produced as much as licensed, like, oh, someone's making that show. Oh, I like that show. I'm going to just buy it. I think you see more of that. And, and so, yeah, it's uncertain right now. But I think the game has got some good indicators of being healthy, whether revenue or those kind of elements, but where it's going to reside on your, is it mobile? Is it, what is it? That's the big question mark. And as a result, it's hard to assign valuation to it in the way that these media companies would like. So it's a lot of stuff up in the air.
Do you see do you see like certain teams going as personally bleak as this sounds? Do you see like a lot of like certain teams going to streaming services or like networks like Marquee, like, oh, if I want to watch the Mets, you need to go to like Max, or if I want to watch the Cubs on Marquee, I have to have like a Prime Video subscription. Do you think something like that could happen?
That's a mess. It could happen.
It is a mess. Yeah.
It's messy. Sure, as fans, it's nice to be able to like go to one-stop shop or go here and find your team and be able to watch other content. But I'm sure they'll figure out what's best for the teams, the organization. I'm sure the league and some of these giant rights holders will have a lot of interest in it. I mean, look, I love what I do and working with ESPN, working in radio, and I'm all for like a chance to see that there's more baseball to be covered and under whatever umbrellas. That's great for the sport. When so many marketplaces have a chance to see it and celebrate it, not just your own team, but but the larger stories in the league. I mean, baseball made a point to go and have this balanced schedule so you can see Shohei Ohtani. Like everybody can see everybody. Soto's coming to he's going to come to half the cities this year and half the next year, and you're going to see Soto playing against your team. That's great for baseball.
I go to school in DC, and I went to Nationals Park in April just to see Shohei. I saw him again in July, but like I was like, I've never seen him in person. Right. I want to go see this. Like this is special.
Right. It's awesome. It's really awesome. So that is there's a lot of positive to build on, and I just hope it lands on its feet and keeps going. I know NFL, NBA has just done a good job, and they're huge, but baseball still got a lot of love.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to me, Doug. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Max, appreciate it. Take care.
Have a good day.